Welcome, climate viewers. This is Jim Lee from ClimateViewer News. It is December 11th, 2016, and I got an exciting show for you today. Got a really cool guy, David Devine, aka Adapt 2030 on YouTube. I want you guys to check out his stuff. Let's get that up there on the screen. You can check him out right there. It's at user Myanmar Living. That's my southern for Myanmar Living. And his website is oilseedcrops.org. Of course, you know, I'm Jim Lee, and I'm over here on ClimateViewer.com and ClimateViewer.org. So let's get to the topic of the day. We're gonna wax deep on a subject that most people really haven't heard a lot about. Clouds are a very controversial topic these days. And what we're going to do is we're really going to break down some details for you that you probably have never heard before. David, why don't you introduce yourself and tell people a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thank you for having me on today. Myanmar Living, that I originally started with my YouTube channel, was because we were buying coffee out of Myanmar, and I was doing more traveling down there, and we noticed a lot of weather changes happening. And one of the things was cold weather events. So at the same time, looking for these anomalous events, why was somewhere near the equator having freeze events and loss to the coffee crop because of cold damage when we were told global warming all the time? Well, I started looking into reasons that this might happen, and then I stumbled into this grand solar minimum. And then one of the things that always accompanies a grand solar minimum is increased cloud cover globally, because our magnetosphere gets so weak that there's different cloud layer forms about 15,000 to 18,500 feet because an increase in galactic cosmic rays. And this is something not a lot of people are talking about. You know, these heavier rain events and heavier snow events that we're seeing. The new narrative in the global warming news, fake news fight is, well, the oceans are getting so hot, so it's putting more water vapor up in the atmosphere, and that's why we're having more snowstorms and more rains. But the reason there's more cloud, and my firm belief is the grand solar minimum is causing these galactic cosmic ray increases, which has been a 12.5% increase over the last 5 years as measured by NASA. So I really wanted to talk with you about clouds and nucleation and climate engineering and all these things that go together, that they mesh, they dovetail in so succinctly, and that's why I think we're going to have a great conversation.
Yeah, so a little bit of background. I'd been checking your videos out, and I thought it was fascinating because you'd really started to touch on some topics that were, you know, really getting heavy into. And really, it's about this cloud aerosol interaction and how nobody really wants to own the fact that they really don't know anything about it. At least in the major journals, the scientific, the climate models, predictions of the future, these are computer programs, and they're only as good as the information you put into them. And what we're seeing really is that when it comes to how clouds are formed and what their, you know, radiation budget and all these things that they're trying to figure out, they really don't know enough to make the kind of judgments and predictions that they're doing. And furthermore, their predictions never match observed data. Would you agree with that?
I would. You know, they even forgot the ocean circulation models. Now, how do you forget a whole southern ocean circulation model? They couldn't figure out why Antarctica was increasing in ice. And, oh yeah, they forgot that there's an upwelling of deeper water that's cooler, that brings cooler water to the surface. How do you forget an entire circulation pattern like that and still considered valid data science? That is a huge driver. And when we start looking at the very bottom, almost directly where it says under the galactic cosmic rays, the hydrogen protons, 90% of all those galactic cosmic rays, positive charge coming in. If I was going to try to mitigate something with the program, I would focus on that 90% mitigation in that one, you know, that's a bulk of the type of electrically charged particles coming into our atmosphere. So what would I would focus on that 90%. So
you're talking about the hydrogen, the protons.
Yes.
Okay, so now we know that hydrogen and oxygen make water. Is this water from space?
Star water.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard this with Suspicious Observer. I mean, this is whole theory that a lot of this, you know, comes from our sun. And because it is creating water, it is water from space, star water. This is, you know, highly contested information. There, you know, they have this stuff called panspermia, that they believe that life spread here from other rocks in space. But at the end of the day, we have all of these particles constantly coming into our system. And the climate Scientologists want to tell you that Earth is in like this, bubble, and we're slowly filling it to the rim with CO2. At the end of the day, we're constantly exchanging, gases and particles with, the universe around us. We lose energetic particles. Do you know about the what do they call them? Flux transfer events? Are you familiar with these?
I am a little bit, but maybe can you explain it to me the way you think about it, and then I can compare what I have as a definition.
Okay, so me and Chris Fontenot, great guy, a microwave planet. I should have had him here today. If I would have had my thinking cap on, I would have. But there's these things called flux transfer events where technically we have this tube that connects the North and South Pole to the North and South Poles of the sun, and that we exchange energy between our planet and the sun in these massive flux transfer events where it's almost like a massive amount of energy leaves our North Pole and travels this vortex that goes all the way back to the sun. Have you ever heard of this thing? Because this is new, and I read it straight on a NASA site. I read it on several different places, and me and Chris have been talking about it because basically this is like the global circuit. This is like the solar circuit. There's this other website, jupitersdance.com. And on it, it talks about how there is an increase in earthquakes when there are no sunspots. The fewer the sunspots, the more likely there is to be a large earthquake. And interestingly enough, we're starting to think that something has to do with these flux transfer events, that it's almost like when there are less sunspots, the sun is giving us energy, which we're absorbing as earthquakes. And then the sunspots are during the flux transfer events where we're massively returning energy to the sun. Anyway, enough about that. Fascinating.
No, but
stuff.
that falls into the whole electric universe.
It is the electric universe.
Absolutely. And this, everything that you consider third dimensional space from galaxy to galaxy, that's 99% plasma in there. It's not just empty dark matter and that has nothing. It is literally energy itself. So the transfer between star systems, galaxies, between our sun and our planets, to everything's an electrical connection. And you've always seen this through ancient history and the way in the iconography, and there's so many, how should we say, like plasma spirals, etc., that's been in 4, 5, 8,000 years ago in the stone stele and the carvings. You see these representations of this electrical discharge events as well. We do live in an electrical universe, and I must agree. Now, can I say one thing about when you're talking about the exchange of, we're not in a closed system here. Yeah. I just read this amazing article. It was called Rooftops on 3 Major European Cities Yielded Samples of Cosmic Dust. Now, generally, the cosmic dust was only thought to accumulate down in places like Antarctica. But recently, they've been finding, because there's so many meteors coming into our atmosphere burning up because of the decreased magnetosphere, which allows more space debris to come on in and penetrate lower into our atmosphere and then burn up. They're actually finding it now on rooftops in major cities because there's such an increase in this. So when you're talking about the exchange of extra or off-planet bodies coming in, including the solar winds and the galactic cosmic rays, now we have meteor dust that's accumulating, and that's starting to form more noctilucent clouds, but it's actually measurable on the rooftops in major European cities. That's how much is above the norm now.
Can you remember the name of that title? I mean, what was that?
Yeah, it's Rooftops of 3 Major European Cities Yield Samples of Cosmic Dust. Dr. Matthew Genge from the Department of Earth Science and Engineering at the Imperial College in London.
Yeah, I got it. All right, let's get that up there for everybody in the audience. So, cosmic dust found on rooftops, 3 major European cities, RT, and over on New Scientist, cosmic dust grains found on city rooftops. So this is not hokey science. This is not us, trying to blow cosmic dust up your butt. This is stuff that's, actually being recognized. I mean, this article says December 6, 2016. This is brand new stuff. I mean, for us guys who are, old school electric universe, have been studying this for quite some time, this is no surprise to any of us. But these, climate Scientologists in their little bookworm boxes, they're not used to having their, paradigms blown up by new information. They believe that they already know everything they need to know. I think that that's why discussions like we're having right now are needed. Go ahead.
And one thing about galactic cosmic rays too, just for the listeners out there, they don't come from just one side of the planet in a stream like our solar wind does. These galactic cosmic rays come in equally from all sides of the planet at all time. And that's one of the unexplainable things that these scientists have been studying for over 100 years. It's been measurable since the early 1900s, but they really can't get why it's such a steady stream coming in. It's not really a pulse, or it comes from everywhere equally all the time. It's emanating from somewhere, or it is actually in the very fabric of the electrical nature of our universe itself, or the galactic system that we're in.
Yeah, that's right. And it's so new. In fact, I've got an article up here on ClimateViewer.com, and you can see it right here. It's called CERN Cloud Conundrum. Earth not warming as quickly, climate models are wrong. This is a pretty fascinating stuff. Everybody knows CERN. You've probably heard plenty of things about CERN, but I bet you didn't hear about this cloud experiment. Pretty fascinating stuff. So there's been a lot of debate about how clouds are formed. And I've been studying this, of course, with the chemtrail debate. And, you know, there's a lot of argument about it, even among the scientists. And what they believed was that sulfuric acid was necessary, that there were certain aerosols that were necessary to pull off a cloud. But in reality, what they found out was all they needed was some galactic cosmic rays, an aerosol, and in this chamber, they created a cloud. What happened was when they did that, they realized that, oh my God, we may have been very wrong about, and this is video credit to CERN. You can see it right there. There's a title, Cloud Shows Pre-Industrial Skies Cloudier Than We Thought. Because they thought that during the time of the dinosaurs and all this, there obviously were less clouds, and they believe that pollution and all this stuff today is creating more clouds. It actually threw all of their models off. And now that they've recreated this with just some galactic cosmic rays and a little bit of, I believe it was soot, it says, did CERN just debunk climate change? Judith Curry wrote this excellent article, and I've got part of it here, and you can go down and finish reading the whole thing. It's over here on her website, and I want to give full credit to her for bringing this up, the Cloud Climate Conundrum. I spoke at the EPA in Washington, D.C. last year, and it was about jet pollution. And I called it the contrail conundrum, because at the end of the day, the EPA was getting sued to help Obama out with his COP21 promises to limit greenhouse gases from jet aircraft. For the first time in history, they were going to have regulations, but only on greenhouse gases. So I went there and I said, how about stop making clouds? For a lot of, obvious reasons, I gave some great ones, but it says the results not only point to a cloudier past, but they also indicate a potentially cooler future. If
the albedo effect on that. The albedo effect would be a feedback loop in itself.
If the Earth's climate is less sensitive to rising CO2 levels, as the study suggests, future temperatures may not rise as quickly as predicted. So wait a minute, you just went to COP21, you scared the hell out of everybody, made everybody sign all these things saying that CO2 was definitely going to heat the whole planet up 2 degrees. We got to stop that, or we'll have to do geoengineering. But wait, CERN says, wait, CO2 ain't as bad as we thought. Turns out it had something to do with clouds. In fact, we might have a cooler future.
Yeah, and Heinrich Svensmark also is all about that. And back when he started his research, they had to build their own laboratory because they couldn't receive funding. And, he was raked through the muck with his talking about what CERN verified, that galactic cosmic rays colliding with aerosols in the atmosphere create cloud cover. He was just dragged through the ringer and then, vilified in all the academic circles. It turned out he was right as well. Heinrich Svensmark, that great movie, The Cloud Mystery. I don't know if you've seen that one. It goes into great detail how they built their collider themselves from scratch, and they had to, ask their friends for funding because they couldn't get funding because it didn't agree with the CO2 model when they were off on their own, and now they proved it, and now everybody says, oh, Heinrich, we want to work with you now. And he told everybody, don't talk to me.
There's a famous movie quote that goes like,
yeah, that's a cloud mystery right there.
Yeah. First they hate me. Now you love me. Blow. This guy called it long before everybody else. It's pretty awesome. He basically says, that, hey, we're completely wrong on this, and we really got to get with this cosmic ray thing. And it's phenomenal. So everybody should check his documentary out, Cloud Mystery. Phenomenally good stuff. And he did have a published paper that got pretty popular, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's where a lot of people started taking him seriously. And after he published that video, The Cloud Mystery, you can watch it on YouTube as well. It's when he really got a lot of support behind him, because there were a lot of other facts pointing to the grand solar minimum, which was increasing, the amount of measurable increase in the galactic cosmic rays. It's up 12.5% over the last 5 years, but over the last 20 years, it's up 20%, and maybe even 21%. And it just going to keep increasing as we enter into this grand solar minimum. So when we push forward into the next couple of years, that 12.5% over 5 years is probably going to be 20% within the 7 years. So as our magnetosphere decreases, that protective strength and shield across our planet, if you will, we're going to get bombarded with these rays, and they're just going to continue to form that cloud layer at 15 to 18,500 feet. And we're going to get more of these atmospheric compression events, these huge, gigantic, literally rivers from the sky that just dump on a single point and drop 3 feet of rain in a storm. It's going to continue. And, there's been a lot of emergency landings from flights. I don't know if you've been following. This is one thing I've been following in the news. The amount of emergency landings brought on by hail damage on windshield of aircraft is just exponentially rising. And it's because they have to fly through these layers that are so dense. They weren't there 5 years ago, 10 years ago. The same layers, the same cloud bands they're flying through are now densely packed with ice when they're flying through. The nucleation, these storms are bigger, they're more ferocious. Extreme climate change coming, they're trying to blame it on CO2, but nobody's really looking at the sun effect of the repeating cycles that we see again and again. Go back in the 1600s, take a look at all the recounts of the most amazing superstorms back then that, literally just destroyed and broke apart fleets of ships with the unthinkable storms of today. But now we're starting to get into the cusp again of that sort of repeating madness of weather that's unthinkable. All right, this is the second front that's ripped through. That first one that came through last week broke all the snow records in the eastern Maritimes of Canada and set all these cold records and record snow all the way from like Madison, Wisconsin over through Chicago, all the way over Pennsylvania, New York, record temperatures, cold. Yeah. This is the second one now within 2 weeks. And when the magnetosphere weakens, we start to get these real mix-ups in jet stream. And this is the same thing they used to talk about. If it happened once and they talked about it once in the 1600s, all right, maybe that's a one-off. But you got the same exact historical correlations in the 1300s, the 1600s, the 1800s, about 4 seasons in a day. Now, these are all the same times that overlap with the grand solar minimums. Now, you can't tell me 3 different sets of texts, centuries apart, talk about the same phenomenon of 4 seasons in a day, and then we're coming back into the same pattern to repeat again. So here we go. This is a cold example here.
Yeah, and anybody who's watching this stuff and can watch the jet stream is folded up like an accordion right now. It'll go up and it'll go down and it'll rip all the way up into the north and all the way back down. And it's scooping hot air one day and cold air the next day. That was going to be my question. I think you already answered it. So you would attribute that to the weakening of the magnetic field.
Yes, but also the magnetic pole itself is moving. So what happens when you start to overlap these, say, okay, we're going into a grand solar minimum and the magnetic pole is on the move. The last grand solar minimum, the pole was not on the move as it is today. We're clipping along at 80 miles per year going toward Kamchatka, Russia. That is a huge jump, and you can see why all the whale strandings are happening and all the unusual animal migrations. They're going to the wrong places.
I agree with that. So I think that it's worthwhile to point out that there's a lot of talk online about using microwaves and, stuff like that to steer the jet stream and, NEXRADs to steer weather and all that. In my research, 6 years now, I have never seen one single paper that recognizes that there's any way that there's a correlation between electromagnetics, magnetic waves, and weather, wind, whatever.
I read through your PDF. Excellent, amazingly excellent work. There's so much in there that I never even knew before about these weather mod programs going on. since the 60s heavy and trying to steer hurricanes and things, and you can see why some of the weather's mixed up as it is now. They just seem to continually tinker with trying to bend systems that they should not be bending. And I never gave my consent to be experimented on like that, personally.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. And for the uninitiated, what we're talking about here is ionospheric heaters. I've been trying to make okay, so for those who don't know, I went out to Arizona and I went to a conference on global warming called Global Warming, an Inconvenient Lie. It was put on by Freedom Force International. It's Ed Griffin's Get Up, and we went out and had a great day, all day Saturday, people giving the most expert proof of intentional deception, manipulation of data. And what you see real quickly is that global warming, CO2 based global warming, is clearly a scam. You can go to inconvenientlie.com. There will be a DVD of the event. But I can tell you what, if you watch this DVD, you will be armed to the teeth with every single bit of detail that you need to tell somebody wholeheartedly that CO2 based global warming is a scam. So at that event, I gave a geoengineering presentation, and the room full of PhD holding individuals had their mouths hit the floor, and it was pretty epic. Yeah, so there was this gentleman, Lord Monckton, and everybody knows him as a chemtrail denier. And they all said, "Will you please make him a believer?" And I think I did that. I'm pretty sure I did that. So yeah, we talked, and after he saw the presentation, he said that was an extremely impressive presentation, and we hit it off after that. Needless to say, this presentation, I'm going to be doing it in its totality very shortly, and there is a video of the presentation. It's in the DVD, so if you buy the DVD, you can see it. I am going to be putting a copy of my presentation there out. But this is just an interesting slide I want to start with before we talk about Haarp, because it's a head shaker. Others are engaging even in an eco type of terrorism whereby they can alter the climate, set off earthquakes, volcanoes remotely through the use of electromagnetic waves. This is not a conspiracy. This is the Secretary of Defense, William Cohen, talking at the Sam Nunn Policy Forum, addressing serious people. I made this image and I forgot to tag it with Jim Lee ClimateViewer. You've probably seen this image on 150 websites. I put his face next to the quote to make it even more real, because people don't take this seriously enough. But that's a hell of a statement, ladies and gentlemen, and it was made back in the 90s. This is where it gets interesting. Now we have these things called ionospheric heaters. This is High Pass. It's up in Alaska, Fairbanks, Alaska. This is Arecibo enhanced high frequency ionospheric heating instrument. It's in the dome that's in Arecibo, Puerto Rico, that you've seen in the 007 movie where they're fighting on the catwalk above it, which you can see right there. And these are antennas. I think they're 72 feet tall. You can see that little blue dot is a person. And they've got this big net hanging over top of it. It's called a cast grain antenna. So they hang a net. They put 5 or 6 of these antennas on the bottom, and now they have a new ionospheric heater like Haarp at the bottom of the Puerto Rico dome. Sura in Russia. This is an old one, but it's 190 megawatts. It's a big one. And then Tromso in Norway is the second most powerful heater on the planet, but they're currently upgrading it to something called EISCAT 3D, EISCAT 3D. And it's supposed to be a target of 100 gigawatts. 100 gigawatts. So Haarp is up in Gacona, Alaska. It is 3.6 million watts in with an effective radiated power of 5 gigawatts. I like to, if you've seen Back to the Future, Doc Brown says a lightning bolt is 1.21 gigawatts. Haarp is 5 gigawatts. This thing is a lightning weapon in the sky. It can shoot electricity in the sky, and they modify the sky with it. And what are they doing with it? This is called radiation belt remediation. They fire electromagnetic missiles into the Van Allen belts. It rides on these magnetic field lines. It scoops up trapped particles, which come from galactic cosmic rays in the Van Allen belt itself, and some of its residual leftovers from the upper atmospheric nuclear bombing we did back in the day. I mean, there's still Starfish Prime nuclear material up there. Do you know that? It's insane.
Yeah, that crazy Hawaii experiment where they could see that hundreds of kilometers away and EMP'd the islands by accident. Oops.
Yeah, I know. So now they're still trying to suck that crap out of there. It's called radiation belt remediation. And Haarp was actually originally designed for that. At least that's how they got the funding. This is from a slide from Dennis Papadopoulos from the University of Maryland. He went to get funding for it, and it was called the Tether Panel. And they said use Haarp as a wind tunnel to determine whether we could actually pull this off. And what they were talking about was protecting us from high altitude electromagnetic pulse from EMP weapons, so which are much more deadly than nuclear weapons. So when they talk about Iran not getting a nuke, it's kind of stupid because they have an EMP weapon. This is originally pitched as a self-defense system for EMP weapons. If somebody sets off a weapon in space, quickly suck the radiation out. That would create an artificial aurora at the poles because of all that trapped particles raining out quickly, and hopefully that would not only save us from, the Heritage Foundation said 2/3 of Americans would die within 6 months if we had an EMP. It's the same thing you see on the TV show Revolution. So they said, if we can get Haarp to suck all that radiation out real quick, then we could prevent the TV show Revolution and prevent our satellites from being fried in space. Even from localized EMP weapons. You know what I mean? Somebody using the Christophilus effect, which is trapped radiation air glow to fry our satellites, using the Van Allen belts themselves to fry satellites. This is geophysical warfare. It's using our electrical currents of our planet as a weapon system itself.
Yeah, but I like how he says, we don't think there's any downside to not having these Van Allen radiation belts.
I know. It's
what? Are you insane?
Insanity. Dr. Jacob Bortnick. The thing that's scary about Dr. Evil is he likes to experiment and he doesn't really think about the ramifications of what he's doing. They just see if they can do. I like to say, with godless people, they are God.
Yeah, but that tether that broke off, remember that NASA mission where the tether broke off and they were up there and you saw that tether electrify as it went up through the belt there? It looks sort of like that on the bottom left, but it reminded me of that tether that snapped off during that one NASA mission a couple years ago. Exactly.
And, there was a pretty popular YouTube channel out there that said exactly that. Well, that's what this tether was. It has to be this tether that they're talking about here. But in fact, this is actually called HiVolt. It's HiVolt. And it was a proposal to do just that, to trap energetic. Basically, it's a lightning rod. If they put the lightning rod up there, particles that are interacting with it are going to charge that rod. And then they fire, like a Haarp bullet at it. And then it's going to rain out in a spiral. It's called a shear Alvin wave, saw wave. What they're talking about is place in this high volt scenario for it to work. They wanted to put like 20 of these in a belt all the way around the world. Not just one, from an accidental tether breaking off because they had a satellite. Yeah, a lot of people have said that, there's a lot of videos saying exactly that that was that. But in fact, it's not, it'd be cool if it was, but it isn't. So I'm not going to say it.
That sounds like one of those things. You remember back in the 1960s when they put all those like 500 million small little copper dipole antennas up in there? What project was that? Was project like Westford, where they put all that? Yeah. Speaking of the ionosphere, when they tried to bounce radio signals by putting 500 million small little copper fibers up there, and they said, "Oh, don't worry, it'll fall back to Earth in 2 years." But there's still 38 clumps of those needles are still in orbit in 2016. I was like, well, it didn't fall out as predicted. Oh yeah, there's the poles moving.
Yeah, that's our wandering pole, man. It's all over the freaking place now, and it's getting faster and faster too. So it seems to be accelerating, which a lot of people talk about. We're going to have a magnetic flip that the poles would actually reverse. I think we're still out to lunch on that. Would you agree? Do you think a pole reversal is likely or no?
If it continues clipping at 80 miles per year, how many more years will it be before it gets to the South Pole? But if it's some accelerated thing where it hits some
it starts hitting the light
point where it's gone 80, 160, and then it goes 360 and boom, and then it just goes. Who knows? But you know what? They do have some volcanic eruptions where it showed the entire pole structure had the magnetically at least had flipped during when the lava had erupted, and by the time it cooled, in the records when they drilled down into some of these basaltic layers where the magnetics, when it comes out, it actually takes the pole signature of the time of the eruption. But they found one specific area where it had erupted, and as it was cooling, there was a magnetic pole shift that occurred. And at that time, it showed the magnetic flip inside the layer there. Pretty interesting stuff. So it can occur within, how long does it take for lava to cool off after an eruption? 2 months, a month, something within that time frame. One thing, speaking of the madness these days with the Van Allen radiation belts, those CubeSats. Have you heard with the U.S. Air Force with the CubeSat? They're trying to set off plasma bomb explosions to try to boost radio amplitude as well. And that's another thing that they're up there tinkering with. CubeSats. I didn't give my permission for you to be blowing apart our atmosphere at hundreds of thousands of degrees.
I covered that on ClimateViewer, and it's U.S. Air Force plans to plasma bomb the sky. And I put 4 Haarp on there because I don't think people realize like the history of how this stuff works. They started doing this back in the 60s. And this CubeSat thing is nothing new. I mean, unfortunately, I wish it was, but it's not. I suggest you guys, I got a video out there, Ionospheric Heaters, how Haarp really works. I made this video back when my map was Google Earth, so Google Earth has gone away. I've had to replace it with an open source map, but regardless, that's how cool it looked back then. I had the Aurora up there and everything. But their idea is they want to detonate plasma bombs in the sky, and they've been doing this all along. I mean, this is nothing new. So the only difference about this is they want to do them with tiny satellites, and the reason why is because they've had this concern about, Chinese, Russian, and any other country shooting lasers at our satellites. We have so few satellites, and they're completely defenseless. They have these hijack robot satellite grabbers, making robots to attach to our military satellites, and then, put a bug on there to listen to everything. So this is serious crap. So now instead they want micro satellites because they can put these things everywhere. And how the hell could you ever tap into all of them? But what this has to do with Haarp, they started doing this back in the 60s with sounding rockets. Back in the day, they did it with sounding rockets. So this is magnetospheric modification. This is 1972. Schematic view of a plasma injection experiment. And you see cloud of plasma released by satellite. Boom. So CubeSats yawn. For me, like, I know the entire history of Haarp all the way back to the 60s. What happened was the minute that they banned upper atmospheric nuclear explosions, this is my geoengineering timeline. It is currently at climateviewer.org/geoengineering timeline. It is going to be at weathermodificationhistory.com shortly in a very much improved format. Yeah, so this is Starfish Prime. For those who don't know about this stuff, they went up, they fired a nuke in space, and it blew up this.
Yeah, that was so bright that it turned day into night, and people could see that.
Yeah, so they have a real close-up of it. And they basically fired off a nuke in space, and this is what it looks like in super slow-mo. But you could see this thing from Hawaii, apparently. So anyway, so they were trying to blow up the ionosphere. The stated purpose was to see if they could eradicate the ionosphere because it was screwing with the radio waves. And that's the same thing they did with Project Westford when they put all the needles up there. The purpose was to create an artificial ionosphere made of needles. And I think in the notes you sent me, it was 36 clumps are still up there.
38 clumps as of 2016.
So long story short, they were doing all this crap. And then in 62, Russia did it. And it's called Operation K. And, details on that here. Any one of these, you can click on entry details. It'll tell you all about it. But then they banned upper atmospheric nuclear explosions. And I think it was right there, Limited Test Ban Treaty, 1963. And the minute they were going to ban it, So October, when they banned that, by then these scientists already knew it was going to get banned. They couldn't blow up the ionosphere. They started launching sounding rockets, and the purpose was to create an artificial ion cloud in the interplanetary space for studying the state of interplanetary medium. Sounding rockets experiments in May. It was in Sahara Desert. Here's the idea. You can't see the ionosphere. It's invisible. So they release chemicals in space to make a tracer, and then they heat it up with a microwave so they can see the results because it's invisible. So they do the same thing in the human body. They put radioactive dye in there, and they use it as a tracer. That's the idea here. They started doing it in 62, and that's why I put here plasma seeding is the proper terminology for this, because it's just like cloud seeding. It's just in space. Weather modification, space weather modification. Cloud seeding, plasma seeding. In space, you're seeding with electrons, protons. So they started doing that back then, and this is what it looks like. Artificial strontium and barium clouds in the upper atmosphere. And this is what they look like. So they release massive plumes of strontium, barium, and other chemicals. Can't make this stuff up. I've even got a great article with numbers for how large some of these, they're in the multiple kilogram dumps. So if I can get up here to C-res, there's this one, and I think it was like 80s. There it is. So then in the 1990, we flash forward some, and this is called the Multiple Instrument Studies of Chemical Releases and Heating at Arecibo. Now, I showed you the new ionospheric heater at Arecibo. There actually was one back as early as the 80s. It got destroyed by a hurricane. But this is what they were doing with it. They have this thing called the CRES, Combined Release and Radiation Effects Satellite. And CRES has a bunch of little trap doors on it, and it releases barium, strontium, sulfur hexafluoride, SF6, the banned greenhouse gas. They dump it in space. So this is a satellite in space. It dumps chemicals just like the CubeSats, and Arecibo heats it up. I mean, does this sound any different than what they're talking about right now?
None. So you have to wonder how all these are dovetailing into control the cosmic radiation. So most people are familiar in weather modification programs going on across the planet. How are they going to try to use this to mitigate the cosmic radiation influxes and increases? Because those truly have a lot more effects that are going to cause more difficulties on our planet with increased floods and just heavier snow. So a lot of different climatic patterns. It'll be drier in some places, wetter in others. Cold events, heat events, it's going to start mixing up. So how are they going to dovetail all of these things here that you're talking about in to try to mitigate all of the increased cosmic rays coming into our atmosphere over the next couple of years?
It may be related. I mean, they say that it's about radiation belt remediation. We also know, and don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to sugarcoat Haarp, because they also are making ELF waves that screw with your brain and cause earthquakes. They're doing a whole lot of other stuff. I could spend 2 hours talking about Haarp. I don't want to get, in fact, let's rein this right back to the topic GCR clouds. So these are barium ion clouds released in space. And I've got all the dates and time from CRES right here. CRES program experiments. Title of this article is Aluminum, Barium, and Chemtrails Explain Just the Facts. And I'm talking about aluminum and barium and jet fuel and all this stuff. But I wanted people to know. I mean, if you want to talk about aluminum and barium, or barium and strontium, they've been dumping it in space for 60 years. So that was my point. And then down here, to prove the point beyond a shadow of a doubt, you can see it says release number, chemical, location, altitude, release period. And there's some pretty big ones in here. It's pretty insane. And you see barium, 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 SF6, SO6, that's sulfur hexafluoride. Pretty crazy. Lithium, bam, right there. Simulated ion cyclotron waves and ion precipitation, 1991, over North America. And then it shows the altitude. So these are, them trying to screw with the ionosphere, just like with the CubeSats. There's absolutely no difference in that whatsoever. It's just the newest thing because it's micronized. Now we're going to make them smaller.
If you can't see it, it doesn't exist, right?
Exactly.
Oh, it's small anyway. It doesn't have any effect. It's small.
So before we wrap up with Haarp, I'm going to get off my presentation, but let's just show this. Ionospheric heaters work two ways. You have polar electro-jet heating, where you use the electro-jet of the Earth itself as a speaker. And here's the auroral electro-jet right there. It's this big ring. And they're actually pumping electricity into it, tuning it to a frequency, and then it becomes a speaker itself, as they like to call it, a virtual antenna. And Haarp is in Alaska. It sits on top of a magnetic field line. That's why they got it there. That's why they heated the regions up there. The electro-jet is there. That's why Norway, Tromso is right there. And all of the other heaters, Sura's over here. They're up there for that reason, because they're near this electro-jet. Now, Arecibo is down here in the middle. So you're going, how in the heck does Arecibo work? Well, they found out a new way to do it. Does not require an electro-jet, can be implemented anywhere, anytime. It's called ionospheric current drive. Instead of heating the electro-jet, they heat a higher portion of the ionosphere, this F region, which makes a magnetosonic wave, which is one of the lowest frequencies ever known to science. And that wave comes down to the E region of the ionosphere, and it heats it. Fascinating. All right, so signal goes up to the F region, bounces down to the E region, heats it down here, and makes a Hall current, which makes this Alvin Wave, which makes elf waves. So, and it says basically they can do anything from 1 to like 70 hertz anywhere in the world with this technology. Inject magnetosonic and saw upwards, and elf in the Earth ionosphere waveguide. So elf shoots out wherever they want to point it. Pretty fat. Point is, now they don't need Haarp. And this is, I want to clear the record. That's why I'm saying this stuff right now. I want to clear the record for all the people, the haters, naysayers, and confused people. The reason why they sold Haarp to the University of Alaska is because they don't need it anymore. They're putting it on boats. And it's called the Strawman High Frequency Array. They want to put it on barges and ships. I'm not making this up. This is from Dennis Papadopoulos himself at the University of Maryland. And you can see right here, ELF Mobile Array Performance. This is what we expect. It needs to be 800 kilowatts, blah, blah, blah. This green line right here is where they want to put them. That red dot right there is where the 8.0 earthquake hit in New Zealand the other day. Optimal region for ELF array. So, and I got photos from some friends of mine in New Zealand, that what they called a Haarp boat out there. And I will put those pictures out very shortly. But you can see this is the new way to do it. Haarp goes mobile, ionospheric heaters on boats. And the reason why is because they can do ionospheric current drive heating instead of polar electro-jet heating. Take that, scientists and naysayers. Moving along. So that was so now we're going to go back to clouds. This is why I did it. Project Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. Noctilucent cloud formed by the breakdown of methane in the circular zone above the Haarp transmitter. So Malcolm Light and these guys from AMEG, it's called the Arctic Methane Emergency Group. These are lunatics who believe methane is going to massively release and kill everybody on the planet, which is...
That was supposed to happen last year, so we're still here. I guess their prediction was wrong.
Yeah, in fact, they said the transmitters can be mounted on submarines, planes, and after 2015 on boats and drilling rigs when the Arctic ice cap has melted. And this was written
No, totally melted. Yeah, no ice this year. Don't worry about it.
Their predictions were right on the money. I mean, come on, guys. So anyway, these jackasses said use a 13.56 megahertz tone from two separate transmitters. See, you got one at 10 megahertz. That's Haarp. Haarp works from 2.8 to 10 megahertz. So this is a Haarp. And then this one over here, it says frequency 23.56 megahertz. And if we shoot this at the methane coming out of the Arctic, the plumes of methane coming out of the ice that we can compress, and you can see it right here, we can compress the methane into diamond dust. And this diamond dust would turn into noctilucent clouds. And you can see the quote right here, Light and Carana. It's Malcolm Light and Sam Carana, 2012. And they called it Project Lucy Radio and Laser Atmospheric Methane Cloud Detection, Energization, and Methane Destruction. So what they're talking about is using 2 Haarps to squeeze methane into diamond dust. Project Lucy in the sky with diamonds. Your reaction? What do you think of that?
I don't have a reaction for that. That's too. How could you possibly have a normal reaction as somebody thinking about these programs? And when we see the onset, and this goes right into it, with this year's onset of the noctilucent cloud formation 3 weeks earlier, and then last year it was 2 weeks earlier, or you might think about how long has this program been going on? Is it intensifying? Because if these noctilucent cloud increases are now a month, 3 weeks earlier, what's really happening in the southern hemisphere right now?
Yeah, and you have to wonder, and it's always got to be floating in the back of your head, is this artificially created? Is it being messed with? And this is one that gets me. They have this thing called the Arctic Council. Now, I was in Ken Caldera's Geoengineering Forum, and one of the guys in there said, I'd like to see the Arctic Council defend the experiments they're already doing. Now, I haven't got to the bottom of that. If one of the viewers in this audience is a very nosy individual and like to point out to me what those experiments that the Arctic Council is currently doing, we could get to the bottom of that. But we're seeing increased noctilucent cloud formation. People are talking about making them out of diamond dust. David Keith at the SRM 2015 conference said, we want to do geoengineering SRM. We would do it with aluminum, sulfur, titanium, and, wait for it, diamond dust.
This takes your breath away, doesn't it?
Yeah, it just makes you get all this information. Makes you just go, what the F? You know? So these are topics that really need to be discussed. They don't account for clouds in their climate models properly. There are people making clouds on a daily basis with chemtrails. You know, noctilucent clouds and methane is just mind freaking boggling. The galactic cosmic ray thing that nobody really wants to talk about. These are major portions of our climate and, you know, the radiation budget and temperature. And if they're not accounted for properly in any of these models, it's like, why are we even talking about the finite details of your CO2 theory when you're really ignoring all of this, let alone things like flux transfer events and the energy, you know, all this stuff, the more fascinating stuff. And what would you say to people who say, I believe in CO2-based warming? I mean, give it to me in a nutshell.
I would just say take a look at the history of cycles. And if you go back to the GSP ice core data set, you know, rolling back 2,000 years, not just using satellite data from 1979 forward to show that it's been warming since that time. And then it's dropped and there was a hiatus for 18 years called the pause, which nobody could explain that in the global warming crowd. Well, let's go back in longer time frames. And then every time you see one of these really large temperature drop-offs of either 1.5, say down to 3 degrees Celsius drop in temperature off that baseline, and then you see those temperatures rise back up again, you might want to ask yourself, over those longer time frames, what causes those dips? What causes those increases in the temperature? And every time those decreases come, societies have a difficult time growing food, and there's always, you know, large changes, because if a society can't feed itself, well, you know, hungry people do strange things. Go back in history and look again, and then if we bring that to today, and about every 200 years you get a 1.5 C drop grand solar minimum, and then something in a 400-year range you get the modern minimums. So you can see these heavier events come on about the 400-year interval, and the softer events, if you will, of less cooling are about the 207-year range. But we're coming back into a 400-year modern minimum type cooling again. Now, with all of this said, and all of these programs able to bend, push, change our atmosphere, I am trying to get to the bottom of which of these are going to be rolled out, or maybe a single one or a conjunction of several, to try to mitigate these cosmic rays coming in, to try to use our present technology to stave off this grand solar minimum effects of the cloud formation, and that with itself, with the mixed up growing seasons and all the repercussions come when you can't grow food on a normal cycle like we can. We know when to plant, we know when to harvest. With these grand solar minimums, that's completely thrown out the window. It'll snow in August, it'll snow in September, it'll be floods and rain all the way until June, that you can't plant in time. So how are they going to use all these technology you just discussed to try to, you know, nullify that and do something with these galactic cosmic rays? Yeah, there has to be a correlation of how they're going to try to stop this thing coming in.
If you're not aware of the fact that there even is such a thing called radiation belt remediation, and you don't know about galactic cosmic rays, you would never even think to look in that direction. That there may be some correlation. They're trying to alter it in such a way. But we want people to actually digest everything we just said, and I'm sure that we've done enough damage for one night. You know what I mean? There's people are going to have a lot of homework. Luckily, you can go back through this video and verify, everything we're saying. I mean, we're not out here saying that this is the way it is and this is the way you should believe. We're saying these are a lot of things that are not discussed at all. Cloud formation, galactic cosmic rays, hell, knocked loose in clouds. Definitely not geoengineering SRM. And, I hope that you guys will go and subscribe to Adapt 2030 on YouTube. David's an excellent source of information on this longer solar cycle that, they tend to throw out. They want to focus on their CO2 based scam theory. And I don't think it's going to hold much water much longer, especially with what we're seeing. I went to this conference. I personally, every single reservation I had about anthropogenic global warming went out the window. Powerful as we think we are in the grand scheme of things, when you compare it to just the solar wind, let alone the pounding we take from GCR on a daily basis. So these are the things that we want to bring up. Is there anything you want to add before we kind of wrap this up, dude?
I would just say thank you for letting me come on and, sharing your ideas too, because we talked a few times about, both of these overlapping the cycles of the sun and possible mitigation measures by our governments trying to control this thing going down. And I would say to everybody out there, do your own homework. Take a look around. There, you have Google. You don't need to write us back and say, hey, what about this? Do your own research. Google is a pretty good resource, although they try to censor a lot of stuff. If you can't find it in Google, move over to another search engine. But go ahead and look through the images. Make sure you look through Google Images. That's a great one. You can get a lot of pictures, and if you like the picture, click on it. It'll send you to the link. Or if you want to go see just articles, look at the link, find the title, click into it. There's a lot of information. I encourage you to look at both sides of the argument, the for and against, so you can draw your own opinion. Instead of just listening to us, please do your own research so you can see both sides of the story and then draw your own conclusion with your own mind, with your own thought and your own knowledge, and take your own power to decide which is correct in your own view.
This is ClimateViewer 3D. It is at climateviewer.org. Those ionospheric heaters we were talking about, I mapped them out in 3D. This is my open source project. You can come over here and it'll actually fly you around. So to do that, this is what it'll look like when you get here. If that's not up, click the view layer button, come over here, click on electromagnetic, click on ionospheric heaters, scroll down here to the bottom, click on Bing. That'll put the satellite up and then go flying around. So here is the Tromso heater. It'll fly you over there, let you take a look at it. If you want to see pictures, click on this, scroll down, look at pictures and details on each one. Fly over to Haarp. It'll take you over there pretty quickly and load it up. Boom. And high pass, we've never seen any of these, and the details on those are here. And you can see like some photos and details. I basically went and got all of the antenna data. This stuff is 3 years old now on my website. There is still nobody on the planet who has had the balls to cover this map or ClimateViewer 3D. So it's still brand new and a good, best kept secret of the internet. But guess what? It's starting to catch on fire right now. So you guys go check it out. It's at climateviewer.org, and you can see the Arecibo heater we were talking about all this time right here, and even a little history about the hurricane that destroyed it previously, and all the details. I've even got links to the CEDAR database where you can read all the instrument details from the nerds themselves. Fun stuff. And of course, I've got the satellite tracking all the way back to 2012. So if you want to see the color version of it, click on the satellites, click on date, pick a date, and boom, you have satellite images. For those looking for chemtrails, make sure you check out the Modus Terra 367 band. It tends to highlight ship tracks and chemtrails pretty nicely. All right, man. David, I really appreciate you coming on here, dude. This was tons of fun.
Yeah, we'll catch up again once I do a little more research and try to see exactly how these are, what they can use, these programs here, to try to mitigate the cosmic rays. Yeah, we'll recircle back again, especially after this winter when it really drops in temperature and people start to see the effects of the grand solar minimum. I believe this is really the year it's going to, not just myself, a lot of other persons I've been learning from my whole time doing this also believe that this year is the rollover year. So we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, I think we're going to take a dip towards the cold pretty darn quick. And just me personally, we had it was 20 degrees one day, it was 70 degrees the next day here. It's insanely fun to watch the weather and watch people squirm as these, as you've so well documented, as the charts don't go the way they expect them to.
All right. Talk to you later. Thank you. Bye.
All right, guys. With that, unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing's going to get better. It's not. Stay educated, people.